Hello guys, today I have for you a review and comparison of the 360Hz 1440p QD OLED Acer X27U, the 480Hz 1440p W OLED LG 27GX790AB, and the 540Hz 1080p TN Asus PG248QP gaming monitors. God damn. These three are premium gaming monitors coming in at $630, $1,000, although it seems like it's going at $750 now, and the Asus around $650 give or take on the used market. The OLED monitors are both 27-inch glass monitors, although closer to 26.5 in reality, and the Asus is 24.1 inches. I said used market for the Asus because it is currently discontinued and will be replaced by the XG248Q SG 610Hz monitor from Asus that should be launching soon at $1,000. So what's the point in including this monitor then? Because it performs pretty much the same as the 540 and 600Hz models from Sawi, that being the XL2586X and XL2586X Plus, which are being sold currently at $900 and $1,000 respectively. They have a few small differences compared to the Asus model, but we won't get into that on this video. And even then, you could just get this Asus monitor on the used market. For packaging, all of them include the same cables, that being one DisplayPort, one HDMI, one USB-B to USB-A cable, and the external power brick, but the Acer does come with an extra USB-C cable. All three monitors are made of plastic, but the LG feels the most firm and well built, which it better does at $1,000. The OLEDs have average bezels, but they also have some extra unused pixels at each bezel, so that they are able to pixel shift and combat burn-in. Now the Asus doesn't have these, and the bezels are a little on the thicker side. Here are some close-up images of the bezels and the extra panel real estate on the OLEDs for pixel shifting. This is the Acer. And this is the LG. And here is the Asus with bezels thicker than my cat. As for the provided stands, the Acer one is kind of awkward and could get on the way depending on your setup. It's kind of booty cheeks. The LG has an average footprint, and the Asus stand has some adjustability to accommodate setup variances better. I normally use a monitor mount on the Asus, and I was too lazy to install the stand for the video. It has nice adjustability on the base, and it's the heaviest and sturdiest. All three of these monitors are pretty light without a stand, but when you take the solid stands into account, they're quite heavy, which is good for firmness. For Vesa mounting, all three have the standard 100mm pattern, and they should use M4 screws, but don't quote me on that. At least the Asus uses M4 screws. For cable management, the Acer has places to hold cables at the top and bottom of the stand, and the top is designed to hold your headphones. The LG has just one space to route cables close to the bottom, and the Asus has places at the bottom and the top. Both the LG and the Asus have RGB in the back, but the Asus is not that noticeable even when in a dark room, and the LG will give a nice illumination on a wall. But neither synchronizes what is seen on the screen to the lighting, which is a missed opportunity in my opinion. For inputs, the LG and Asus have the same inputs, that being one USB-B input, two USB-A outputs, two HDMIs, and one DisplayPort, then a 3.5mm headphone pass-through. The Acer has all of these, plus one USB-C, which I'm not sure what it's used for, maybe for display, an extra DisplayPort, I don't know. Quick note, this Acer monitor seems to be a Microcenter exclusive, as I couldn't find this specific monitor anywhere else, and the webpage only shows Microcenter as a retailer. But it uses a 3rd gen Samsung 360Hz QD OLED panel, the same as, for example, the Dell Alienware AW2725DF and MSI MPG 271QRX, if I'm not mistaken. Now for motion performance, how big is the difference between 360, 480, 540 Hz? Well, let's see. Just going by numbers, the jump from 360 to 480 is double the jump that you get from 480 to 540. So we are getting into diminishing returns territory. In theory, it shouldn't be worth it, right? But there's another factor that we have to take into account, besides price, and that would be the ULMB. To be specific, ULMB2, which is a type of backlight strobing. It means ultra-low motion blur, and that's a feature exclusive to the ASUS of these three monitors. This type of technology by NVIDIA is under other names in other brands, such as DIAC for Sawi and ULMB for ASUS. And this feature might just make the 540Hz TN panel worthy of consideration. The way it works is that between frames, the backlight of the LCD panel is turned off. So in that time between frames, where pixels change color, which is where you would see any ghosting, nothing is displayed, so you cannot see the transition of pixels between frames, and therefore you cannot see any ghosting. This technology is especially useful for LCD panels where pixel response times might not be very fast, especially when compared to OLEDs. And besides the fact that they don't have a backlight, that's one of the reasons OLEDs don't have such a technology, because the pixel response times are so quick that this ghosting or delay for color change of the pixel is imperceptible for a human, even in motion. And therefore there is no need for this technology at higher refresh rates such as 480Hz in theory, but there is similar technology on OLEDs called black frame insertion. On this LCD TN panel, even at 540Hz, you can tell the difference between ULMB on and off. First, before this slow-mo footage, here is a motion comparison capture from ratings. As you can see, the 360Hz can duplicate an image if you move it fast enough, which is what I experienced in-game at the sides of the screen mostly. When we reach 480Hz, there is no duplication, and at most there is some blurriness. At 540 on the LCD, it seems like some sections are clearer and others are blurrier than the 480 OLED, depending on the color that the pixels are displaying. And when we turn on ULMB2, it's just insane how crisp everything looks in motion. It doesn't fundamentally change the speed of the panel, it just holds a single frame without any pixels changing color until this refresh cycle is done, and then the backlight is turned off while the pixels transition color. By the way, pulse width means how long the backlight is on a scale from 10 to 100, and it does affect brightness. Now, before I show you some footage, if you are sensitive to strobing, you might want to cover the ULMB footage on the right, as the camera did capture the strobing of this technology. This footage was recorded at 960 FPS on my Galaxy Note 9, but I lost the replays after recording on the 360Hz Acer, so I had to get creative and recreate these situations in game, but you should still appreciate the difference in motion clarity. One thing to note, according to ratings, ULMB2 should work down to 360Hz, but on my monitor it was grayed out at every refresh rate except 540. I do have an AMD card, so that might be the issue since this is a NVIDIA technology, but I can't say for sure. Also, another thing to note is that backlight strobing requires a stable and constant refresh rate on your monitor without variations, so you cannot use it with G-Sync or FreeSync at the same time. Not necessarily a stable game frame rate that can vary when using ULMB, but the monitor refresh rate must be locked. As I was saying, the backlight strobing is also a reason OLEDs don't have this technology, as they simply don't have a backlight. Every pixel just turns on and off independently. The closest thing that OLEDs have is black frame insertion, where a black frame is inserted every other frame, giving a similar effect. In other words, that would mean you get half the frames of your refresh rate and the other half are black frames. However, in theory, it shouldn't make a difference with OLEDs if your game can reach the maximum refresh rate. Unfortunately, these monitors don't have black frame insertion so I can show you the difference. And then back to adaptive sync, since the OLEDs have very good response times and no ULMB to consider as a trade-off to G-Sync and V-Sync, they do have a very good adaptive sync implementation or experience, but OLEDs generally struggle with variable refresh rate flicker, which I will show later. Now, some of you might be concerned about ghosting, and I will report that there is absolutely no actual perceivable ghosting in the OLEDs, and anything that you perceive as ghosting would be a limitation of the frame rate or refresh rate in combination with the motion of your in-game camera rather than the panel itself. The Asus being a TN panel and a fast one at that doesn't suffer from ghosting either, but similar refresh rates than an OLED, it wouldn't be as clear. It would need 1.5 times the refresh rate to match an OLED, right? That's what I thought at first after watching OLED reviews, but even without the ULMB2, the 540 Asus looks way smoother than the 360Hz, at least on fast camera movements or fast moving objects. Maybe it's not 1.5 times, but instead 1.2 or 1.1. However, when the in-game camera or an object or character is not moving too fast, such as when shooting someone at mid-range or long range, even 360Hz is good enough and you would barely be able to tell a difference in real time, or just straight up wouldn't be able to depending on the game or specific situation. But as I said, on fast-paced games and short ranges, you definitely can tell the difference between these three monitors. As 00 Twitchy mentioned, in some situations you can make the 360Hz OLED blurry or choppy, but on 480 plus it's clear enough no matter how quickly you move your camera, even though the 540 will be clear. From my time playing Overwatch, which is the most fast-paced game I play, everything that was around my crosshair was clear enough even on the 360Hz. The biggest differences were on the edges of the screen, since the FOV makes this part of the screen move faster than the center, and as I said, in real time and around the crosshair the differences are much smaller. So with decent crosshair placement I found even the 360Hz to be enough. If they forced me to use this 360Hz OLED, I wouldn't feel handicapped, and it's competitive enough even if the other two options are better. And another thing with the OLEDs is that they are 1440p, and the higher resolution sometimes compensates for the lesser motion clarity, as Optimum mentioned in his video. For example, if you are having a 1v1 and your target is strafing left and right, in the 540Hz you would be able to tell that their character is starting to move to the other side easier, but with 1440p you could also make out the difference between their character model and the background better, which in some situations also helps to read that movement, so I think it really depends on the scene. For colors and image quality, I'm going to let the monitors speak for themselves with different content and different ambient light. As you can see, OLEDs are absolute insanity in terms of colors. Even if you crank up the saturation or vibrance in a TN panel, the colors won't be as accurate and the contrast still won't be as good even when increased in settings. The OLED colors are very close to what I see with my own eyes right out of the box, and you could get them somewhat close with some settings on a good LCD panel, but they would still look a little bit off, and you will never get these true blacks of the OLED panels. In fact, when I have shown you the Asus TN monitor, I cranked up the colors both in the monitor and the AMD software. And I do have to note the colors are slightly more vibrant on the QD OLED panel out of the box, but you can crank them up a bit on the W OLED for a similar effect. Although the W OLED seems to have slightly warmer overall tone, that is a little exaggerated in my camera. And the QD OLED looks more red tinted in the camera than it actually is. In reality, they are not that much different from each other. Another thing is that in the Overwatch footage you have seen, the blues in the map select screen, for example, look more saturated in the camera than in real life. Now let me activate the HDR option in one of the monitors and show you where it shines. As you can see, content or games like Hollow Knight, Silksong, where you have very bright areas and very dark areas at the same time, are just unparalleled on OLEDs. And by the way, the HDR on the LG is just as good as the Acer. Also, here's a look at the three monitors displaying a mostly black image with some white elements. And the QD OLED looks way too red in general in the camera. It doesn't look like that IRL. They are much closer than what this image shows. In fact, here is a couple pictures taken with a Galaxy S25 at the bottom and a Note 9 at the top. And this is a bit closer to what I could see with my own two eyes, with the white text being like the S25 on the bottom, and the red or orange with the black background being like the Note 9 at the top. Now it's time to compare the coating on these monitors, and I'm sure you can tell the one on the left is the glossy coating and the one on the right is a matte coating. The Acer Predator monitor is the only one with a glossy coating of these three, with the other two being matte. Personally, I think the glossy coating looks much better because the matte coating diffuses the light coming from the monitor, just as it diffuses light to combat reflections on the screen. With the glossy coating, it gives it a sharper look that once you notice, you can't unsee. If you live in a basement like me or you have a dim room, the lack of an anti-reflection coating shouldn't be an issue, and it will have a positive impact on image quality. Now, speaking of the coating, I noticed the LG monitor has some kind of grain or texture on the screen, and I don't know if it's the panel itself, the coating, or both. Here the LG is on the right and the Acer on the left, and it's as if the screen was made from cloth, especially when you are sitting a bit close to the screen. It's just like some Samsung phones. And here are some extra pictures that highlight the issue. It seems as if the pixels weren't able to uniformly represent colors, and I don't know if it's natural to this panel or it's a manufacturing defect. I will probably contact LG and ask. It is noticeable while gaming, but less so. In terms of brightness, current LCD panels can reach a much higher brightness, which also helps with reflections in a bright room. But in darker places like my room or a basement, the peak LCD brightness will just make me blind. And this QD OLED panel was a little dim for me with my light on, and the W OLED was fine. But there's an option on both OLED monitors to squeeze out a little bit of brightness should you need it. Speaking of dark areas, the OLEDs have a problem with variable refresh rate flicker when the refresh rate, not the frame rate, gets inconsistent, which is more common and noticeable when going from a high frame rate in-game to the menus of games, which are commonly capped at 60 FPS and are sometimes darker than the game. This VRR flicker is caused because some monitors struggle to deliver the proper electricity to the pixels when the refresh rates change constantly, but some monitors struggle more than others. Some have built-in measures for this, but I couldn't find anything in the settings regarding this, but maybe it's built-in, I'm not sure. It personally didn't bother me that much because the frame rates are high and constant in my case, and I would only encounter it when pausing. But if you play games that occasionally stutter, and if it bothers you, you might have to disable FreeSync or G-Sync. Now to the viewing angles. They are impressive on the OLEDs. I can look at these monitors from the sides, top or bottom, and I can see everything just like if I was looking at them from the front. Now when you compare them to an LCD, the LCD TN is just pathetic. The colors get all messed up, especially from the bottom of this monitor, and admittedly it's not too bad from the sides or top, but from the bottom it's horrible. Personally, it wouldn't be an issue for me because I have it mounted on an arm, but if I wanted to use it for watching YouTube or a TV show in my bed and didn't have a TV, then turning the stand more than its usual limit is an extra hassle. And you also have to get the angle just right. None of this is a factor on the OLEDs where you can just turn it a bit without having to move the actual stand and you're good. And you don't even have to do that in the first place with these insane viewing angles. And here's an example without ambient light. And here I will show you the settings you find in the OSD for these monitors. For audio, the 360Hz Acer monitor has built-in speakers which have an adequate volume, but the quality could be better. And I was about to show you the audio from the 360Hz monitor, but it's copyrighted, so GG. And the LG and Asus don't have built-in speakers, only audio pass-through. As for noise or heat issues, there are none on any of these three monitors, they're all within reason. Now I know some of you may be concerned about OLED burning, And even though it shouldn't be an issue with non-static content, you might want to be careful when using OLEDs for work. And as for these manufacturers, Acer doesn't have any warranty for OLED burning, as stated in their monitor warranty policy. At least they have a 3-year warranty for other parts, but Microcenter, which is where we got this monitor from, did have a burn-in and general protection plan you could purchase if you want. LG offers a 2-year warranty for OLED burn-in in standard use and for other parts. And there is no point in looking for warranty info on this Asus monitor since burn-in is not a concern for this type of panel, and this monitor is discontinued. But their OLED models have a 2 or 3-year burn-in warranty depending on the model. And just a reminder, but don't forget that warranties can change by region, so make sure to check in your region. So which one of these should you choose? Besides the most important factor, which is your budget, if you're a mega sweaty tryhard that exclusively or mostly plays esports and both your computer and game can handle more than 500 FPS at 1080p, then you would be happy with the Asus monitor if you can find it, or one of the 600Hz, 540Hz, 400Hz, or even 360Hz away models with Diag Plus or Diag 2. This backlight strobing tech is a game changer for motion clarity and it's most noticeable in esports. Even a 360Hz TN with Diag 2, for example, would have slightly better motion clarity than a 480Hz OLED, but the 480Hz OLED might be able to compensate in overall clarity with the higher detail. If you are somewhat of a tryhard but you also enjoy other types of games and content other than esports, and you have a beefy PC that can handle 480 FPS at 1440p, and most importantly, you can afford a $1,000 monitor, the LG monitor or similar won't disappoint. Now, if your budget is not quite that high for a $1,000 monitor, or it just sounds like too much, which is understandable to be honest, and maybe you aren't a mega tryhard so you don't need or can't quite push more than 360 FPS at 1440p, you will be satisfied by a 360Hz OLED. Though you might want to be careful about this specific model or brand because of the aforementioned lack of burn-in warranty. Now, if your computer can't push these higher frame rates, you will want to consider upgrading your PC first, or maybe find a 240Hz OLED if you can reach those frames. Now, if you're looking for another kind of upgrade, for example, going from a 240 LCD to a 360Hz OLED, if you got the budget and the machine, it's a no-brainer. It's better in every single aspect. The OLED will usually have the better motion clarity, even if slightly than an LCD, as long as backlight strobing is not a factor at the same refresh rate. So if you can afford it and you're not sure if you want to get an OLED or LCD with similar specs, just go for the OLED and make sure it has a good burn-in warranty and that you don't abuse it with static content, and to enable built-in OLED care features. And that would be all for this video. Don't forget to leave a comment if you have any suggestions or questions, and if you like the video, consider liking and subscribing. Thanks.